Hey everyone, I'm Mike Pietrzak, a mindset and habits coach, and I'm on a mission to help you become your potential. Today I'm speaking with Alex Campbell, an ontological life coach, professional musician, and a student at the Institute of Authentic Tantra Education, where he's training to become a certified sexologist. I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun diving into that realm. Alex is also a talented musician, and after spending more than a decade pursuing that passion, Alex now explores the meeting points of spirituality, sexuality, and ontology. And as a coach, Alex, you work with people who are trailblazing their own path in life and where spiritual purpose meets embodied human living. I think one of your taglines is heart meet brain, brain meet soul, as you say. So I love that. And you can find Alex or contact him at alex@ihitthings.ca. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, mainly just drums. I don't hit people.
Fantastic. Can I assume I hit things is that you're a drummer?
That's correct. Yeah,
Amazing.
drummer. Yeah.
I had this amazing drum kit when I was in high school and into university, and I think it's my only regret in life is selling it. I think I got $800 for it, and I have no idea where I blew the money, but I wish I had the drums at this moment. So I keep talking to you about getting a new kit, but it's just in an apartment, it's tough to start smashing on the drums. So one day.
Yeah, especially with a kid too. Yeah, that's a dangerous combo. A great dangerous combo.
It's life gets more complicated as you go, I think, but you work it out. Humans are very adaptable.
Yeah.
So let me start by asking you, what's an ontological life coach? I know the term and the meaning. We studied all these interesting terms, ontology and tautology and empirical and normative in my undergrad, but it's been a while, so maybe you can refresh our memories on ontology.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I remember hearing that term initially and being confused and curious about it. Yeah, I guess maybe a simple way of diving in is that ontology is kind of a fancy way of saying the study of being.
Right.
So in a coaching context, like being is separate from doing. And a really simple analogy of understanding that is that you can imagine yourself driving 50 miles down the road, 50 miles per hour down the road,
right,
in a 30 zone. And it might be because your being is a state of anxiety, you're late for a meeting, someone just broke up with you, you're distracted, or you might be doing the exact same thing and you're feeling carefree, maybe you just got promoted, like your favorite music is playing, like you're feeling good and you're not noticing the speed limit. So same doing. And ontological coaching, we focus our work there on the inner world, the inner being of the client, listening for their inherent beliefs about themselves and the world and how they show up in it. And by creating a shift there, you can kind of radically shift someone's life rather than slow incremental changes in it.
I 100% agree. I think those beliefs about what the world means and beliefs about money or about relationships, they sort of determine our destiny, don't they?
Right. Totally. Yeah. So we create the world from that place, right?
We do. And I can relate to the, driving over the speed limit thing. For a lot of my life, it felt like I was driving too fast, not just in, metaphorical sense, but literally on the highway, and have several speeding tickets to prove it. Right. But I've been noticing lately that tendency to do too much too quickly. And for me, there's been this real lovely epiphany that, I can do less but better. And the second thing, and I just printed this out and posted it on my wall, is focus equals power. And so I'm starting to shift my beliefs on that with the help of a coach, actually.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so tell me, how did you get into the coaching world?
Yeah, initially just through a friend of mine who was finishing the program that I ended up taking. So she was at the end of the program, and just hearing and seeing what it was changing for her in her life was really interesting and intriguing to me. And she had like an interesting kind of set of language around talking about all this stuff and these distinctions that I found really interesting. And for me, my background was more like in spiritual exploration and plant medicines, and like that was kind of the angle that I related to exploring the inner world. And she had this kind of like almost like the boardroom version of transformation or something, the office version. And it sat at the other end of the spectrum. Sorry?
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's funny, right? Like we have, people talk about transformation or growth. And in my mind, it's a pretty large spectrum. And on one side is, like Burning Man or plant medicine or, a silent retreat for 10 days, like deep dive experiences that could potentially radically change your worldview, your relationship to yourself, could offer healing overnight. Yeah. And then the other side of the spectrum,
by this type of, radical change.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the other side is like slow, steady, continuous growth. So kind of like equivalent to working with a personal trainer. Week by week, you have gains and change. So, seeing that the two sides of the spectrum really intrigued me, because there's absolute beauty in both sides, and the two married together is where it gets really juicy in my mind. Bringing it to.
So I assume this is your MO for coaching. This is how you coach people, is on both halves of those equation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to like go to a retreat with a client, but an awareness of those two sides is really useful. And that's part of why, I think I tend to attract clients that already have some sort of spiritual path or inner work, because there's kind of that fertile ground to do ontological work within. And they have a context of like extreme shifts to kind of the more weekly, regular, rigorous.
Yeah. And I find there's almost like a magnetism or, some kind of polarity at work where we attract into our lives the people that we need at the time, or especially if we're, looking for people to work with, we tend to find the people that we can help the most. And so it sounds like you're really on that track.
Yeah. I mean, and this, me 10 years ago was struggling very hard within all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so to help people that are a few steps down the mountain is like really rewarding for me to be in that space.
I think that's what makes you a powerful coach is, I found that the best coaches I worked with are the ones that have had like the toughest journeys and, probably some trauma, I'm guessing, in your life, like everybody else.
Right. Right.
And yeah, that you have to go through it yourself a little bit to be able to help people through those same periods.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure this resonates. I'd assume this resonates for you, but like, if you're not doing the work in your own life, who do you stand, as the facilitator for someone else to do it in their life?
Yeah, that's right. It strikes me there's this image of, the doctor who smokes telling you to stop smoking.
Right.
that could be similar where there's a coach who's not doing the work. I've had single sessions with coaches who I just didn't gel with because they didn't seem to have that energy about them, that they really know what they're talking about, or that they're walking the walk, essentially, or walking the talk. So you do want to find someone who's done the work themselves, and maybe has read a few books and maybe done a few courses of their own. And yeah, it sounds like you've been doing that. So maybe let's dive into your past a little bit. Tell me about your journey of spirituality and what happened. You mentioned the arbitrary point of 10 years ago. You started this path.
Yeah, probably a bit arbitrary, but yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, I was geeking out and like reading Eckhart Tolle and meditating and was probably like pretty depressed, profound spiritual journey, but like totally unhappy human. And I was playing music at the time and just like trying to figure life out. And at some point I drank way too much ayahuasca, and arguably had lots of growth and healing and some trauma from that experience.
Right. Did you do that with a guide, or was this like a solo journey?
It was with a guide. And in retrospect, not someone I would choose to work with again. Not out of disrespect to them. It's just the ethos was like, if you are even doubting if you've had enough, you should drink more.
Interesting.
If you're in your head at all, you should drink more, because it's a journey of the heart. It's like, yeah, and there's also the idea of like minimal effective dose.
I'm sure the biological point where your body just is not, and your mind is not benefiting from this at that point.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, to have your nervous system completely overwhelmed is that's what trauma does. Right. So even if you do it in the name of healing and growth, it might not actually be what's useful.
So this was one of those, you described these, these more radical experiences. This was your first, your first experience was like a sledgehammer experience into the world of spirituality. And you've returned to ayahuasca since then?
Yeah, I think it was about 6 or 7 years later. Actually, it was in the start of 2020, like right before the world shut down. So lucked out on timing and spent a lot of time finding the people I wanted to work with, and that for me made all of the difference. And I felt like after the first 3 ceremonies, I had like cleaned up the mess from the 3 that I did many years ago, and then there was more after that. Yeah,
you raise a good point. I have many friends and just associates who have participated in these ceremonies, and some have been once, some have been, I think one friend of mine says he'd been 40 times
right.
Ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And there seems to be like a range of quality out there in the guides, and there are some people holding themselves out as shamans who probably shouldn't be leading somebody in these exercises. So yeah, it kind of it helps to do your research first, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's a tremendous responsibility to facilitate that work. I mean, even without plant medicines, like to facilitate someone's growth or change or healing is a huge responsibility. And then if you add like the power tool of this concoction of plants, which can literally change someone's life in a night, it has that potential at least. Yes. Yeah, it's super important to find good facilitators.
A friend of mine in particular, who I'll leave his name out of it, but he came to my birthday party. It was probably about 5 years ago now, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. But when he came alone, and he was all cleaned up. He looked really healthy and happy, and like he had this shining out of his eyes, the type. And I was like, why don't you sit down? Tell me what you've been up to. And he sat beside me at my birthday, and we talked the whole night. It was amazing. I was kind of like, maybe neglecting a few people, but it was just this fascinating description of his journey. He went to a very high-end clinic in Costa Rica, I think it was. Paid more money than he wanted to do this, but there were, it was very well managed, and he says it was by far the pinnacle experience of his life to that point. Helped him to understand a lot about himself and his behaviors, and he very soon after that rearranged his life entirely. It's not that this was a silver bullet, right? I'm sure you've figured that out too. It's not a silver bullet, right? It's a starting point.
Yeah,
a jumping off point, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. There is no panacea, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's when that whole conversation of like boardroom transformation and jungle transformation gets really interesting, because like I'm sure we've all seen the examples of someone comes back from the jungle all shiny eyed and glowing, and then in a month or 6 they've kind of gone back to their old self and their old life, and nothing has really actually been accomplished.
Is it just that the experience wears off, or what's happening there, do you think?
I think no. I think the trap would be to think it wears off, because then you have to go do more, right? And I think what actually happens is like the structure of your life, the one you left to go to the jungle and then came back to, creates you in a certain way. And it's the same thing we're talking about with beliefs and ontology, right? Like your structure or your life is the result of your views and beliefs about the world.
Yes.
Right. So even though if you go to the jungle and puke your guts out and change your beliefs about yourself and the world, when you insert yourself back into the lifestyle that reinforces those old beliefs, unless you make changes, it's going to push you back into that old way of being, that old form of existence.
That, and so it's both an environmental and a mindset thing. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, we get to work at both, right? And only working at one is ineffective, in my view.
I found that too. I mean, in my work, I always start with the mindsets. I call myself a mindset and habits coach, because I think it's 80% mindset and 20% habits. And those two things alone really set the direction for your life. It's what you think and what you do. And I think those things have been echoed by spiritual leaders for thousands of years. The Buddha. There's some of the Hindu religion, Islam, even Jesus saying similar things like what you think is what you get. And so you're right, I suppose. If you go to some southern place and do the ceremony and you have this epiphany, there's a tendency to go backwards almost because you're still living in the same mind.
Yeah.
Fundamentally.
Yeah, I mean, it could be painful, right? To like come back and see with fresh eyes all the things that are wrong or painful or uncomfortable about life and the world and your relationships. Could be overwhelming. Yeah.
My experience is all secondhand. I have on my list of things to do once the pandemic opens is go have an ayahuasca ceremony. And going into it not thinking it's going to radically shift things in life, but as just another tool almost in the toolkit. I remember, similar to what you're talking about, I went to see Tony Robbins in 2016 or thereabout. Went to San Jose, spent 5 days with 10,000 other people in an arena. It was a mind-blowing experience. It was fantastic. I did all the pre-work. I read all the books before, watched every video I could find on YouTube. I was a Tony Robbins fanatic. In a way, still am. But came home and was on this monumental high for a long time, made all these wonderful changes, started spouting off all these wonderful, philosophies. But you sort of return to your old ways of being if you're not careful. And it's like a path of least resistance.
Right.
On the other side of it, however, I did the virtual event years later. This was last year. And I noticed in hindsight how much of this I had already started to apply to my life. And so it's almost as if it's working in a very subtle way on you.
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious, like, do you, if you want to share, if you're clear, like, if you did go south and jump into those ceremonies, like what would is there a clear intent of what you want to get from it? Maybe it's the same as the Tony Robbins thing, or maybe it's totally different.
I think that's why I haven't done it yet, is because I don't know exactly what I'm looking for out of it. I hear all these wonderful stories from people about how it's been such a positive experience. However, I don't know, they say it has to call you, right? I don't think I've been called yet. And, to do it today would be almost like, I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to dabble with it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and maybe there's value in that. But I suppose there are other tools maybe that I need to process and work with first.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, right? Because like in the West, we hear a lot about ayahuasca, at least in the spaces where that sort of thing gets talked about. But in Peru, there's like thousands of plants, and there's like sonangeros, not just ayahuasqueros, and you can work with San Pedro. There's so many plants they work with, depending on like the illness or why you would do it. And in the West, we're just like, oh, like spirituality, medicine, healing, let's go.
It's almost like another pharmaceutical, but hipper, cooler.
Way hipper, yeah.
It's very popular right now, and I know a lot of folks like, especially Tim Ferriss, big proponent of psychedelics, etc. And there's a lot of great research coming out of very prestigious universities. Great science on how something like psilocybin in magic mushrooms, having amazing, almost silver bullet like results on patients who are depressed or have PTSD or things like that. And so I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's about time that there's like formal study of this stuff too, because it's been used for thousands of years in certain parts of the world in a very therapeutic sense, and kind of finally the Western world is bringing the rigor of science to like, how do we use this well? What support do you need before and after to have it like actually sustain those results too, that's really cool.
Well, whatever is right in my mind is what works, and so if that works, then let's do it, right? I mean, there's this weird, I don't know if it's a puritanical or a holdover from the Protestant ethic that just don't do drugs, period.
Right.
And it's so comically laughable. Like I remember vividly being probably 7 or 8, driving home from school with my mom, who taught there, and my brother in the backseat as well. And she was giving us the lecture: don't do drugs, don't do drugs. Drugs will ruin your life. Drugs will kill you.
Right.
And obviously, the conversation should have been a bit more nuanced. My
Right.
mom was the most straight-laced woman you ever met. Never touched even pot in her life.
Right.
Loved to drink, but
Right.
drugs were no. That wasn't a drug, right?
Right.
And so I grew up with this almost like a terror of drugs, or like it was actually more accurately almost like an elitism that, I'm better than that. I won't
Right.
touch those drugs. So it was years. I was 24 before I smoked my first joint.
Okay. Right.
I luckily had a great woman in my life who forced it on me. It was great. And my thinking just quickly evolved on this, and I do see it as a tool. Obviously, it's a tool that can be abused,
Right.
but such a helpful, bucket of tools essentially. What
Yeah.
what was your upbringing on drugs, and what brought you to ayahuasca?
Yeah. I mean, compared to that story, like relatively lax. And I think I heard all the same stories too. I remember like the presentation at the high school of, you know, the person that rolled up and talked in front of the class about how their whole life was ruined by cocaine or like whatever drug, right? And I was like, oh, I don't want to be that guy. He was a musician too. That was the funny thing. He was like starting to have some like studio music career, which was my dream in high school, and it ruined his career. And I was like, okay, never touching cocaine, like got it. Um, but nonetheless, like West Coast, like everyone smokes weed. That was kind of normal. It was weird if you didn't. Being in music, everyone smoked weed. There was lots of people who played with psychedelics. They would do mushrooms on the weekend. And um, I think I was like in my late teens before that became a reality for me. But it definitely opened up a lot of curiosity. And I was already really curious about like about reality, about the inner world, about like what is actually going on here underneath just the things we talk about. And at some point, I went to see a presentation by an organization called MAPS, and you've probably seen their work. I think it's what is it? Mindful application of psychedelics or something. I forget what it stands for, but Rick Doblin is one of the proponents. They've done lots of great research and discussion around like therapeutic use of psychedelics. And Gabor Mate was there, and he spoke about ayahuasca. And as a random aside, he was our family doctor when me and my brother was born. So there's this weird, trippy little through line through all of this.
There's a bit of synchronicity. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So, like saw him speak and I was like, holy shit, like I have to do that this life. Like I have to do that at some point. And then it was a couple years before I found like connected with the people that I could do it with. And then that's when I had the first experience and kind of
experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Is there anything you would recommend for people that might be listening in, and like what they should look out for, how to find someone who's responsible with this or qualified?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, like nobody needs to do ayahuasca.
Right.
Just because it's trendy and hip and people have cool stories doesn't mean you should do it. And there is a long list of reasons not to. If you have like, if your familial history shows like predisposition to certain mental illnesses, that's a good reason not to do it and find other methods of healing or growth. There's dietary restrictions, medication restrictions, like that stuff is really important. Don't mess with it. And beyond that, like, yeah, really, really invest or investigate who you're going to work with. I think that's probably the single most important thing, and know that there's always a risk. It's not a lightweight experience to enter into.
That's good advice.
Yeah. So really, I'd just say like set yourself up for success, and that includes preparing and then integration afterwards. And now people are starting to talk about that, but even 10 years ago, nobody talked about integration. It was just like kick you out of the retreat and then see ya. And that's where some of the issues show up. It's not just in ceremony that you'll go through really heavy stuff. It's afterwards too.
Right.
So yeah, set yourself up for success. Like be prepared, be ready to integrate afterwards.
Do the work before and after so that you're getting them the best experience possible. I like that.
Yeah. and making use of the medicine too, right? Like it's, like we were talking about earlier, it's when you make changes based on your learning that like that's when your life actually changes. It's not in the ceremony that you transform. It's when you're actually back living life and
Yeah, you start to apply the things you've learned. Right, right, right. Yeah, I've known some people who, they're reading 100 books a year, but I don't know how much of that knowledge they're applying to their life.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there probably should be some kind of balance between the learning and doing, as balances
Right.
every situation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So you've been doing this amazing spiritual work, and I agree with you. I think the conversation about what is reality, what's going on here, what's it all about. I have this, someone, I forget where the story comes from, but it basically goes: imagine yourself, you wake up, you're dropped in a field, you don't know how you got there, there's nothing around, you can't see anybody, there's no signs of civilization. What do you do, right? A lot of people, they live their lives, I'm going to sit and wait wait for someone to rescue me, tell me what's going on. Whereas those explorers, the people that are doing the spiritual work, they're the ones that, okay, I'm going to go off in this direction and climb the mountain and see if I can see something from the higher ground, right? And I love that idea of actually taking your spiritual evolution into your own hands and doing the work. And so clearly you're doing that, which I love. You're actually doing this in a more structured academic way, aren't you? You're part of, what is it called? The Authentic Tantra Education Institute?
Yeah, the Institute of Authentic Tantra Education. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So tell me, what's it all about? What are you learning? What's the purpose of doing that work?
Yeah. It's a brilliant school. Tantra is kind of a funny thing, maybe not so dissimilar from ayahuasca in terms of like how it gets talked about and how it gets taught in the Western world. Because a lot of people talk about Tantra, but like they're actually teaching Neo Tantra, which is a similar thing to how yoga shows up in the West. Right. Like we go to stretch class and we learn how to breathe a certain way, and it's great for our IT band or whatever, but that doesn't make you a yogi, and it doesn't mean you're actually following the path.
I see. So in a lot of cases, the spiritual element has been taken out.
Yeah, or like you cherry pick a little piece and then think that's the path, right? And so like something that's often missing is lineage. And part of why I love this school is that it's actually based within like the Shengpa Kagyu lineage, and there's a lama who endorses the way this school is teaching, and what like it teaches a specific modality, and the modality is focused around sexual healing.
Right.
Like Tantra is not about sex or sexuality. It's a complete like set of spiritual practices, some of which can be done sexually if you choose to.
Yeah, I think that's a big misconception. Since the whole Sting fiasco,
right?
Having tantric sex with his wife for hours and hours, and that got
right.
poked at endlessly. But I don't think there's been a lot of understanding of authentic tantra, and on my part as well, I don't really understand it very well. Can you give us a basic primer on what's involved?
Yeah. So the school that I'm part of studies Tibetan Tantra, right? So Tantra originated in India, got spread to Tibet. In Tibet, it was mixed with Bon, or at least in our lineage it was. And Bon is the indigenous religion of Tibet pre-Buddhism.
Okay.
So it's more of a shamanistic, religious, spiritual path.
Yeah.
And Tibetan Tantra mixes those, again, or at least in our lineage it does. And like Tantra means to weave, right? Like you're weaving visualization, like light, form, sound, like you're chanting, you're visualizing yourself as deities and stuff. It's pretty esoteric in a lot of the practices, but it works. That's the thing. Like same as ayahuasca, like we don't really know how it works, but it fucking does something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if that gives a clear picture or not at all.
Well, I guess maybe another way to get at this is like, who would benefit from doing some tantra or studying it? What kind of problems would you bring to tantra?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, within the modality I'm trained in, it's really useful to heal any sort of sexual dysfunction, but it's not just to heal what's wrong, it's also to cultivate and develop.
Wow.
Right. So there is that component of like, have crazy orgasms, have sex like for 3 days straight. Like you can develop all these capacities, and that's why some people get into it. But like the bigger picture is that it's a complete spiritual path. So anybody who wants to experience spiritual growth and progress would be a great candidate for Tantra, at least potentially. Yeah.
I came to this knowing very little about it, but I guess it's interesting how deep some things go when you start to poke a little bit.
Yeah, totally. It's a massive subject. It really is.
I believe it. Yeah. I mean, I'm quite familiar with meditation. Started meditating at, I think, age 19. I got this great book called Awakening the Lama Within, I believe it was, Awakening the Buddha Within, by an American Lama who studied in Tibet for a long time.
Oh, cool.
And it made so much sense, for me at the time. It was how to cultivate more calm and centeredness, and to really, it's one of those foundational habits that you can build a lot of your other actions on top of.
Right.
And to this day, I try to meditate daily, at least 10 minutes. And I find when I don't do it, especially for a few days in a row, things start to go funny in my life, right? You start to have more fights with the wife, or you're a little less patient with your daughter, or you're not as focused at work. And it's these spiritual practices are extremely practical. And there's a ton of great scientific method studies on the benefits of meditation. It's like great for your heart, it's great for your sleep, it's great for your lifespan, it's more focus, more energy, et cetera, et cetera. I don't feel like there's the same kind of understanding of Tantra in the West on that level.
Yeah. Well, it's quite funny because there's a woman named Spring Washam, and she's one of, I think it's Jack Cornfield is one of her main teachers. But they're talking about how like mindfulness has become westernized.
Yes.
And there's all these, like, you can go on retreats, you can study, like there's all this like info and books and Instagram posts and whatever. But like it's through the lens of like how to be a better functional Western person. Yes. Which is missing out on like why they do those practices in the first place, which is to advance on the spiritual path, or it's like through the lens.
Life hack almost.
Say that again.
It's becoming a life hack almost.
Yeah, and like it works as a life hack. Yoga is great for your body, right? Meditation is great for a calmer mind and lets you do more things in a day. It does, and there's that. It's kind of like going to the cool doorway and taking a picture instead of walking through.
Right. Interesting metaphor.
And that's fine too. The doorway is great. Why not? It's ornate. Take a picture. Great. And if you want, you can go through, and there's a whole nother realm to it.
It does seem like people are not going deep on many things these days. In general, I mean, it's hard to generalize well, but I would say in 2021 in the West, people are doing so many things, but not on any kind of focused, deep way, right? There's all kinds of Facebook posts about how can I multitask effectively. The answer in my mind is you can't. Right? You can't multitask effectively. You can smoke a cigarette while you're backing out of the driveway, talking to your friend on the phone, but it's not a good idea, right? Like you want to probably focus on one thing at a time and go deeper on it, and you'll get more value out of that. But it's a lesson I'm learning right now, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hear you, and that's the world we live in too, right? Like we're so encouraged. Not, and I don't mean this in a victimized way, but just like recognizing the space that surrounds us. Like we're so encouraged to accomplish, to do 18 things at once, to have 5 careers. Like that's the world we live in. So it's totally understandable that we're looking for like, I need to be able to do more because I need to pay rent, and like we have valid reasons. And that's also part of the whole thing of like, if you're going to do any sort of inner work, the real work is to have it not be differentiated from outer work. And the world we live in is one that demands people or encourages people to be busy and to accomplish all the time. And that itself is not necessarily very healthy. Like you can actually start to see how that's like can be traumatic. That can really encourage people to operate over top of the stuff that is there for them to deal with if they have the space for it.
Absolutely. So what's a solution to that, or what's a practice you can use to sort of fight against that tendency of, the external pressure to do more and achieve more?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said in the very beginning of like doing less and doing it well. Um, and and drawing in this whole like ontological thing too, like a lot of this is getting out of our own way,
Mm.
right? Like it's, we can look at how the world tells us we have to be busy, and we can also take ownership of how we've internalized that,
Yeah, that's true.
right? And look at the experience of life we actually want to have, not just society's standards of success and like the goal we're supposed to meet.
Mm.
We get to actually be a choice for which ones we want to play in.
Exactly. We are in control of our lives completely, and we get to create the reality that we want. It's not like we can snap our fingers and have that happen, but you start to, you know, um, change your beliefs, change your habits, and then you'll start to notice the effects after, a period of time. But
Yeah,
I find like one of the biggest challenges with my clients is they are stuck in this idea that I have to do this, I have to get this. And why do they believe that? Well,
yeah,
usually it's their parents have taught them this. My parents taught me, you have to be at the top of your class. You have to
right, right,
always be, I want you to do your best, as long as your best is like 90% or greater, right?
right.
My
Yeah,
dad taught me, hey, money is important. I remember telling him one day, oh my God, I just discovered Leonardo da Vinci. I was like, did you know this guy did this and this and this? And his response was, yeah, but he died piss poor. And
oh
like,
yeah,
as a child who's
yeah,
impressionable, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should then focus on money, right?
yeah.
So what you
Interesting.
tell yourself, or what you tell your children, it has such a, these ripple effects over time.
Yeah,
And that's hard to root out sometimes, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, and that whole like parent-child dynamic, you never know like how it will play out, right?
Right.
And we can try to be responsible and be good parents and stuff, but like you can't control 100% how those things will land.
No, no, you can't.
But yeah, I mean, I'm so with you though. Like, and I think like we have strategies, right? Like, but underneath those strategies is like, what are you feeling? And under what you're feeling, it's like, what are you needing? Like, what needs are met or unmet?
Yes.
And if, busy, success, money, it's like, well, what do those things actually get you? Do they like have you feel validated or important or successful? Like, and, we have a need to feel or to be validated, say,
Yeah.
and having money is one strategy to
Yeah.
meet that need, but
Whereas
it's
another
the only
person might
strategy
have
to
a
work.
totally different strategy.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe they're doing tantra or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Freaking weirdos going to the jungle and yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's a beautiful thing, right? We're all running our own spiritual path, whether we know it or not. I mean, there's this wonderful book by Rob Bell, who I just love. His podcast is amazing. He was a pastor in a mega church, California. It was huge, huge operation. He got sick of that. He got out of the game. Now he does just podcasts, and his wisdom is just off the charts. I love him. And he just released a book recently called Everything is Spiritual.
Right.
Fantastic book. And the whole premise is you can find spiritual evolution in everything. Cleaning
Yeah.
up dog crap off the sidewalk is a
Yeah.
spiritual act.
Right.
Um, raising kids, doing the dishes, exercising. All of this is just
Yeah.
fodder for your spiritual journey, and whether you know it or not, right? Everyone's on the spiritual path. Just some are more dialed in than others, I suppose.
Yeah, I love that. Like, I think there's the monastic ascetic approach to spirituality, right? Remove the things in life that distract you from your spiritual path so that you can progress deeply in it. And then on the other side of the spectrum is the like yogic path, like path of inclusion. Dog shit, sex, drugs, like whatever bring it on, like bring it. It's all
Yeah,
fuel.
that side of things. Have you ever been drawn to the monastic life?
What's funny is we're talking about busyness, and like my life is so busy right now, and part of me is like, fuck, I would love to just like
Yeah.
go to retreat, like do these practices all day long because they're amazing, like catch up in my reading. So there's that. But no, I think like I love living as a fully human embodied experience that
Yeah.
has spirituality woven into all of it.
Yeah, there's this image in my head of, you're walking with one foot in the material world and one in the spiritual world, And I kind of like that, being in both worlds, right? I don't think you can really separate those things. Even the monks in a cave somewhere have to, get food and water somehow, and take care of their bodily functions. It's just, you can't escape it, right? We are here. We don't know why. We don't know how we got here, but
Right.
there's value in kind of pursuing both of those paths.
Yeah.
Although some
Yeah,
days
and who says that
just
one's in the way of the
go and live
other?
in a community somewhere. Just, my wife and I talk about this, like, let's go to some kind of community where we don't have to worry about possessions, or it's just
Right.
some kind of commune, but not too many of those around where we live, so I'll have to
Right.
wait.
Yeah, well, yeah. See at Burning Man for 1 week of the year, and then
Yeah, right,
yeah,
exactly. And mini monastic retreats, I suppose.
yeah,
Yeah. You brought up sex and drugs and all this stuff, which is a wonderful part of any life. You are actually studying to become a sexologist, right?
yeah. Not something I would ever say I was doing, but yeah, yeah,
This fascinates me. So tell me, what is a sexologist? I have a basic understanding of what that person might do, but I'm so intrigued by what it actually entails.
yeah. So just the nuts and bolts side of it is that through the Tantra program, we meet all of the requirements through ACS, which I think is uh, American Certified Sexologists,
Okay.
or the community of ACS. We can double check that in the notes, but they normally certify sex therapists, right? And therapy is like a different discipline. I'm not a therapist. I'm not in training to become a therapist, but our modality, which is more of like a somatic sexual healing practice, meets all their requirements.
Okay. Interesting.
So some of the training that allows us to have that is like we're trained in polyvagal theory and trauma and like proper understanding of anatomy, which is not as common as you might think. And then also the like sexual yoga side of it, the tantra side of it, and like weaving all that together it's an amazing modality. It's really potent. Quite cool.
Fascinating. So when you're fully certified and you start working with clients, what types of clients will you work with? What will be their concerns? What will you do with them?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a range, right? Like there could be the people that are drawn to it because they have an issue or a problem. So whether it's like erectile dysfunction, or like there's pain with penetration every damn time, or the relationship itself isn't working. These practices are really, well, they're really good at bringing up and healing trauma, for one.
Right.
And there's still that distinction of like, we're not trauma therapists or trauma specialists, but by doing these practices, things will often come up if they're there to come up. Yeah. So we have some training to be with that. And it's also a really cool path if you're drawn to spirituality and sexuality, especially in mixing the two. Because even if you have nothing, well, everyone has stuff to address and heal, but even outside of like fixing what's wrong, there's so much beauty and depth and connection and power in learning these practices just for like deepening your relationship with self and then in relationship.
Absolutely. I want to maybe push a little bit more on that, or scratch the surface a little bit more on the intersection of spirituality and sexuality, which is an interesting thing to say, because in the West, at least, we have this idea that those are two polar opposites, right? Right. This, of course, comes from our Christian, Judeo-Christian, history in the West. You don't talk about sex. You know, it's a dirty, sticky, sinful thing, right?
Right.
Obviously, that's not helpful or healthy at all. And so, elaborate for me on that intersection between spirituality and sex or sexuality.
Yeah. I mean, and there's so many angles to look at that from. Like, I feel like that's such a massive,
one of these.
beautiful conversation. Yeah, totally. One really grounded, simple way of looking at it that I don't often hear talked about is that a aside from the fact that in the Western world, we all need a lot of healing around how we relate to sexuality, putting that aside for a moment, sexual energy is a way to elevate spiritual practice in the same way that when you're going to the gym, you can add more weight, or you can do something while you're balancing, right? You can lift 20 pounds above your head, or you can do that on one leg on a bouncy ball, right? And now it changes how you do the practice. So, we learn to meditate with our eyes closed. Well, can you meditate with your eyes open? Can you meditate while you're doing sexual practice?
Right.
And so you're, or using plant medicines, like you are elevating the intensity of the container or the space you're in. And by practicing in these different spaces, you're developing your capacity in spirituality.
Interesting. I've heard, whispers of this type of, I suppose as a practice, you can call it. I read a fair amount of books about, positive masculinity and about sexuality,
Right.
and how to take that sexual charge, that sex energy that normally you'd expend by either having sex or masturbating, and put it into something else, and that, I have trouble computing that sometimes because I find like if you're horny, that's all you can think about is sex, right? And at least for the average guy. And so to transmute that into something more productive or powerful or spiritual or healing, I'm on board. I'd love to know how to do that. So are there any like techniques or practices or?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so with you. Like sexual energy is energy.
Yeah.
Right. We especially, thinking back to what you just said about how we separate spirituality and sexual, like go rub one out real quick in the bathroom with the door closed. We like hide it, seclude it. It's just like it's part of our human energy. And there's so much power in our sexual energy, and that's part of why it's useful in a spiritual path. So part of our training for men is to become multi-orgasmic, meaning that you orgasm without ejaculation.
Right.
So the typical thing is like we literally like shoot our energy, shoot it out, right? And it's really interesting the differences men notice when they practice semen retention in order to learn this. Like semen retention is just the first step. This is not to be confused with the like no fap movement or like semen retention as a complete thing. Like that's just the first step.
In this case, you'd be referring to you're still orgasming, just not ejaculating.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting.
And then you're now able to actually move your energy through your body in a different way, and you don't get depleted. And like one of my teachers, when he first practiced semen retention, he gained 10 pounds of muscle.
Really?
Doing the same amount of physical activity.
Tell me more.
Right. Yeah, because he's no longer like depleting his body of those nutrients. At least that's the Taoist perspective. Some Western science thinks it's bullshit, but in my personal experience, it makes a huge difference in your energy levels.
Yeah, and Western science is usually a little bit behind. Well, in a lot of cases, it's been behind on a lot of the Eastern, they call it philosophies, but some of it is just knowledge that we've had for thousands of years.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's so many cases in Chinese medicine of like, cool, they made this discovery 800 years ago that just got validated, 200 years ago that just got validated. Right. There's a huge trend of that.
So give me the life hack. How do you actually do this? Is it a matter of just Kegels, or is it breathing exercises? How do you become a multi-orgasmic man when you're and not ejaculate?
Well, I think the thing is that there isn't a hack for it. And you can go on the internet and people will talk about exactly that. Like, how many Kegels do I have to do? And that's part of it. They help. They're great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it typically takes people like a number of months or over a year to actually fully learn this. So there's like, you actually need like training. Some people might be able to do it on their own, but I think that's very rare. So there's actually a number, like there's a series of steps that we lead people through and that I've been led through in order to learn this. And some of it's pretty esoteric and weird. Some of it's all about moving energy through your body and all these meditations and visualizations, but they work. Esoteric or not, they work.
It works if you put in the time and effort. Yeah. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of people's practices love Tim Ferriss, but he's all about the life hacks, and he doesn't
Right.
we talk a lot about the, what can you do long term that will be a beneficial practice in life. I mean, maybe he does, but and I'm just not dialed into it. But
Right.
I am finding that it comes back to this focus thing. If you invest a little bit more time in something, it will grow, right? It's the same when you plant seeds.
Yeah.
You're not going to water them; they're probably not going to sprout and germinate. So
Absolutely.
you make a really good point about you got to invest the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, if you want to do something radical in your life, like that means investing radically, whether it's money or time or energy or all three or whatever. But yeah, I think we're so caught up in, I don't have enough time, therefore I need a life hack. Instead of maybe we actually just need to look at our needs and our priorities a little more earnestly and then create the experience we actually want to have.
I really like that line you just used. Can you repeat it? It was about radical change.
Yeah, like
want to do something.
if you want to create a radical change, you might have to radically invest in yourself and in your life to create that. Yeah,
I love that. I've kept you on for a while, so maybe we'll call it there. It's been absolutely amazing. Can you leave us with maybe your what are you reading right now? What are you learning about outside of the Tantra? What's on your mind these days?
Yeah. What's on my mind is feeling like I'm finally starting to see the water I swim in, that we were all born into. This whole year with COVID has been, on one hand, tragic, on another hand, quite beautiful. And like, we're finally talking openly and commonly about systemic racism, talking more about gender inequality, talking about trauma, talking about like our wounds, and that creates the possible space to work on them. And yeah, so for me, I don't know, it's just really, really opening up, seeing everywhere the remnants, or not the remnants, but the enduring effects of colonialism, patriarchy, and unhealed trauma, and how it shows up in every day for every human.
Yeah.
And that it really comes down to, like, we have this spiritual path, or the inner path, but it's really no separate from the outer path. So like inside, outside, same. If you're going to work internally, unless you're going to spiritually bypass, that means being in conversation about the world around you. So yeah, I'm just trying to be in more conversation about all this stuff with more people, not because I know the answers, but because the conversation needs to be had.
Well, when we spoke, and that's absolutely beautiful. I love that philosophy. And when we spoke the last time, I really got that sense from you that you're on this amazing spiritual journey and doing it for the right reasons, and really just interested in helping people along the way, and I'm sure you're doing that as a coach. And I'm really looking forward to our next conversation. So this will be the first one, but not the last for sure.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for inviting such an open conversation and exploring all this juicy stuff.
I love these conversations. Let's do more. So thanks, Alex Campbell. And people can find you again at alex@ihitthings.ca. Is that right?
Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Instagram and Facebook, both great too.
Okay. We'll find you there as well. Thanks for the chat today, my friends. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Yeah. Chat soon. Absolutely.
See ya.